They cut down the tree my father planted the day I was born. No warning, no permission, just a cold HOA order and a crew with chainsaws. That oak stood for 34 years, a living memory rooted in family and legacy. But when Karen, our new HOA president, decided it interfered with the community's visual harmony, she didn't just take a tree, she started a war. What she didn't know was, I don't give up, especially when it comes to family. If you love stories where karma hits back harder than a storm, make sure you subscribe to Her Stories and smash that like button. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We're building a global community of HOA survivors. I still remember the way sunlight would filter through the branches of that oak every morning, casting dappled shadows across the front porch where I sipped coffee with my daughter before school, and where my father once sat with me as a boy telling stories about perseverance and pride. That tree was more than a decoration, it was part of the family, planted by my dad the day I was born and carefully tended through childhood storms, late night swings, and quiet talks during heartbreaks. When my wife and I bought the same house, years later, to raise our own kids, keeping that tree healthy was never a question. It stood like a guardian, tall and firm, marking time for our family in a way that photos never could. But that changed the day Karen moved into the neighborhood. She was newly elected as the HOA president of our peaceful little cul-de-sac and wasted no time making herself known. Rules were revised, new guidelines printed, and laminated violation sheets started appearing on doors like unsolicited flyers. Most neighbors grumbled but complied. I tried to stay out of it, thinking she'd ease up. Then one Friday morning, I came home from work early and saw it, my oak, already halfway gone, massive limbs lying across the grass like fallen giants, a work crew in hard hats laughing and tossing them into a shredder. I screamed. They stopped. One of them looked guilty, the other shrugged. But they all pointed to the same thing, a document signed by Karen authorizing removal of non-compliant landscape features. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the jagged stump where decades of life used to sway in the breeze. No warning, no hearing, no chance to say goodbye. Just the brutal silence of something beautiful destroyed in broad daylight. I stormed to Karen's house, hands shaking, heart racing. She opened the door with that signature smirk, holding a clipboard like a weapon and saying, "That tree was in violation for years. Be thankful we handled it for you." My jaw dropped. That tree was 34 years old. I choked. My father planted it. She blinked. Irrelevant. It obstructed the visual uniformity standards of the front-facing lot view. It's in the bylaws. And then she closed the door in my face. That moment changed me. I went from heartbroken to furious. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And justice, in this case, would be meticulous. I dug into the HOA bylaws like a paralegal on caffeine, combing through every clause and footnote, finding inconsistencies, contradictions, and, most importantly, a lack of proper procedural notice. They hadn't sent me anything certified. Number, photographic proof. No vote from the HOA board. Just Karen acting on her own, using the president title like a crown. I consulted a property attorney who lived 2 blocks over and had his own vendetta with the HOA over a patio umbrella. He agreed to help. We filed an injunction, followed by a lawsuit citing illegal removal of private property, emotional distress, and property devaluation. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything. Every tree removal Karen ordered, every neighbor complaint, every board meeting where she shut people down or twisted votes. I wasn't just building a case, I was digging the roots of her downfall. But as the legal wheels turned slowly, I realized something bigger. I didn't just want compensation. I wanted to rebuild what she took, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood that had quietly suffered under her dictatorship. So I came up with a plan, one that would bloom into something beautiful. But first, I had to get through court, where things would get far messier than either of us expected. Asterisk. The day of the court hearing arrived like a storm I had been preparing for. Suited in a calm fury and armed with every document, video, neighbor statement, and a literal binder titled, "The Destruction of Legacy," Karen showed up with her usual smugness, dressed in a tailored blazer that practically screamed, "I'm the authority," and brought the HOA's lawyer, a man with slicked back hair and the kind of face you'd expect to see in a billboard ad for divorces or personal injury claims. They tried to play it simple, saying the tree was non-compliant, that they acted in the best interest of the community, and that I had failed to respond to previous notices. But my attorney wiped the floor with them. He pulled out time-stamped photos of my yard with no prior notices, showed emails and text messages from neighbors confirming no one was warned, and played a recorded conversation I had with one of the tree crew guys who admitted they were just following Karen's orders and didn't know it was private property. The judge, a middle-aged woman who had a tired look and probably dealt with HOA nonsense more than she cared to, narrowed her eyes and asked one crucial question. Why was the homeowner not given written notice and an opportunity to appeal? Karen stammered. The lawyer tried to dodge, but I had already submitted proof that no such notice existed. It was an open and shut case. The court ruled in my favor, awarding damages, not only for the value of the tree, but for punitive, emotional distress. I walked out of that courtroom not just with justice in hand, but with something far more powerful: momentum. Within days of the ruling, whispers traveled through Oak Heights like wildfire. Neighbors who had kept quiet began sharing their own stories: flower beds destroyed, fences repainted without consent, warning letters for excessive seasonal decor. I wasn't the only one. Karen had run the HOA like her personal fiefdom for years, and now the cracks in her kingdom were showing. With the settlement money, I made good on the promise I whispered the day I saw my trees stump. I started planting. Not just one replacement tree, but dozens. I partnered with a local nursery and bought 50 young oaks, maples, and flowering dogwoods. But I didn't just plant them in my yard. I got permission from neighbors, many of whom had dealt with Karen's wrath, and we turned Oak Heights into a blooming rebellion. Every yard that once looked sterile and controlled now had new life. Shade grew where HOA rules once cast shadows. Children played under saplings. Elderly neighbors sat beneath new canopies, drinking lemonade and finally smiling. I even started a neighborhood gardening group. We met weekly. We talked about trees, flowers, soil, health, but really, it was about community. People began pulling together like never before, united not just in greenery, but in resistance to the petty tyranny that had ruled us. Karen fought back. Of course, she filed appeals against the ruling. She tried to enforce old bylaws, argued that we were creating an environmental imbalance or violating HOA landscaping integrity. But her power was fading. With each tree planted, her control weakened. When she threatened to fine a neighbor for hanging wind chimes too melodic for community standards, even her own board members began questioning her decisions. And that's when we made our next move. We held a recall vote. It wasn't easy. Karen tried to block it, claiming procedural violations, but we knew the rules better now. We had learned. We filed every form, collected every signature, and within a month, the vote was official. On a rainy Thursday night, in a packed community clubhouse, the ballots were counted and Karen was removed from her position by a landslide. She didn't even show up. Word was, she'd already started packing. Karen's resignation was supposed to be the end of it, but for me, it was only the beginning. After everything, after losing something irreplaceable, fighting for justice, and rallying a neighborhood that had been too scared or too worn down to speak up, I realized that what we had done wasn't just about trees. It was about reclaiming a sense of ownership, not just over property, but over dignity. With Karen gone, the new board, now led by a kind, pragmatic man named Harold, who had once been fined for his granddaughter's sidewalk, Chalk invited me to help draft a new set of community guidelines, ones that emphasized respect, communication, and balance instead of control and fear. We created an appeal process that actually worked, launched monthly open forums, and replaced the laminated warnings with real conversations. The neighborhood transformed before my eyes, not just in foliage, but in spirit. There was laughter. Again, there were block parties and garden tours, and even a triplanting ceremony where we honored everyone who had once been silenced by the tyranny of HOA absurdity. My daughter planted a cherry blossom tree beside our driveway during one of those events, her small hands in the dirt, her face lit with pride as she whispered, "This one's for Grandpa." I broke then, just a little, but it was the kind of breaking that heel stairs of gratitude, of release, of something sacred taking root. And through it all, I never replanted the original oak in the exact same spot. Instead, I let the stump remain, carved it into a seat, actually a smooth bench where I now sit every morning with my coffee. watching the neighborhood come alive under the canopy of the trees we built together. It reminds me of loss, yes, but also of what came after: unity, purpose, and strength. As for Karen, I heard she moved 2 towns over and tried to join another HOA board, but the community there had seen the news stories about Oak Heights and politely declined her application. I guess word travels fast when you get sued for unauthorized arboricide and publicly recalled by the people you once ruled. Sometimes karma doesn't need to roar, sometimes it just needs to grow, one root at a time. And as I walk past those 50 trees now rising across the neighborhood branches, stretching towards sunlight like open arms, I know my father would be proud. His legacy didn't fall with that oak. It multiplied. It lives in every breeze, every shadow, every quiet moment where life gently, insistently, keeps reaching for the sky.